So welcome everybody to this seminar of the Center for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance in Canberra. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be here with all of you. We have a special meeting today because it's the first time we're trying out a new format, which we call Center Meets Center. So the idea is that our Center for Deliberative Democracy engages in a conversation with another research center or another research project or a group somewhere else that also focuses on democracy. So we are very excited to welcome Ricardo and some other members of his group here today. Ricardo Mendonça from the group Margem, which is the research group on democracy and justice at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. As always, we're being super international and we're being all over the place. So Ricardo is in California, currently visiting Simone Chambers. Most people from the center, from the Margem group, and I'm here in Belo Horizonte in Brazil, and most of you are in Canberra. So we have different time zones once again, 11 a.m. in Canberra, 9 p.m. in Brazil, and 5 p.m. in California. And because most of us, and because our institution is in Canberra, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of Canberra, the Ngunnawal people. I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contributions they make to the life of the city and this region. And maybe since we're all in different places, we can all take a moment and think about the people who were here before us and what they have contributed to the culture and to the land where we currently are. So it's the third seminar in our seminar series on media communication and deliberative democracy, and much of the research of the Margem Center focuses on this area, but of course the group is very diverse. We'll learn much more in just a moment. And I think I'm just gonna hand over to Ricardo. I think, Ricardo, you've prepared a little presentation, but I also wanted to ask you to kick this off. What does the name Margem actually mean? So it's the name of the group for the democracy and justice studies. What does Margem mean, and why is it the name of your group?
Thank you, Hans. Thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you for the invitation. So yeah, it is a pleasure and an honor to be here. Before we talk about margin and define margin, I'll adopt your suggestion. And I just wanted to ask people to quickly say their names and their positions in Margem. So people from Margem, if they could quickly introduce themselves. And then I'll briefly present an umbrella presentation of Margem, a general and encompassing presentation. And then we'll have 3 more speakers quickly talking about their specific projects, who are Leticia, Mariana, and Renato. And we'll do that in the 30 minutes. But thank you for the invitation. And I'll start with Mariana introducing herself. And then please ask another person from the group to introduce him or herself. Please, Mariana.
Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Mariana. I'm a master's student in UFMG, and I research Black music. And I'll go to Renato to present himself.
Hello, can you hear me? No? Yes, okay. My name is Renato. I'm a PhD candidate in political science in UFMG and a member of Margem. I will call Leticia.
Hello there, I'm Leticia. I'm also a PhD candidate and a researcher at Margem. And I'll call Caio.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Caio. I am a PhD candidate in communications here in UFMG. I study public grief. I'm going to call Cristiano.
Hello, good evening. I'm Cristiano Rodrigues, and I'm a professor of political science at UFMG and also a researcher at Margem. So let's call Lucas.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lucas Veloso. I am a PhD candidate in political science here at UFMG. And let's see, Gabrielle, you are there?
Hello, I am Gabriele, and I PhD candidate in political science, and I study gender and communication.
Next is Juliano.
Hello, everyone. My name is Juliano. I am a PhD in UFMG, and I study social movements in political science in UFMG.
And Felipe.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. My name is Felipe. I'm postdoctoral fellow here in Margem. And Ricardo, we can start.
So I think we've all the ones present here from the group have introduced themselves. I'll just get the presentation now, Hans. Okay, can you see it? Okay, so thank you again for the invitation. So we are Margem, which is Margins in Portuguese, the research group on democracy and justice. And we had a big discussion on the name, Hans, why Margem? And it has two meanings, actually. The first one, it's because somehow we are in the margins of both political science and of communication, as we're not doing mainstream political science or mainstream communication, and working on the peripheries in terms of methods and in terms of theories and discussions that we face and discuss. And the second thing is that because we're interested in peripheries, in margins, in borders, in things that connect other things and that establish boundaries and limits, and that are somehow also at the borders of society. So we're interested in injustices, and we're interested in comprehending these peripheries, these borders, and so this is how we look at democracy and how we look at justice in order to make sense of our studies. So Margem is a group devoted to theoretical and empirical investigations aimed at promoting democracy and at shedding light on injustices and struggles against them. So the whole idea of looking at injustices and understanding injustice empirically is quite relevant to the comprehension of the margins of society and how we can make a more just democracy and more just society. What are the main theoretical influences for Margem and historically? So critical theory is a key dimension, influencing a bunch of work developed, of research developed in Margem. Democratic theory, and broadly discursive and deliberative conceptions of democratic theory. So the strong relationship with the center, where I did part of my PhD and where Felipe has done part of his PhD. So the center is very relevant to Margem. Feminist theories are very relevant to the group and have been discussed in several works. Communication studies, broadly speaking. So several of us have come from the field of communication or have been or are in the department of communication. So the centrality of these courses and of communication and of communicative relationships is at the core of Margem. Pragmatism and relational sociology are also very relevant, and Foucault and Rancière are two authors extremely important also for some of the research conducted in Margem, for some of the investigations and some of the lines of research. I'll talk about them briefly. So what's the history of Margem? We started in 2011 as a research group on digital democracy. And then we changed to Margem in 2015. So there was a change in the name and in the configuration of the research group in itself, broadening its scope. But so discussions on digital democracy have always been important to Margem, although not exclusively. So this is an important dimension of the group, but Margem captures the broader scope, looking at democracy and justice, including the digital elements, but not restricted to them. Today, Margem gathers 7 researchers from the departments of political science and communication, 11 PhD candidates, and 3 master students. So you could meet a few people here, but this is the network nicely made by Lucas with the names of some of the other scholars that are not here in the presentation, but that are part of Margem as full researchers in the group, in the university, in the Federal University of Minas Gerais, or as PhD candidates and master students in the group. So we are based at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, where Hans is now. So this is the broader view of the campus. On the right-hand side, it's Fafiche, which is the building where we're placed. And this is the broader view of campus, full of trees. And Hans was quite happy the other day because of the open area he was seeing. And these are a few pictures of Margem and of former visits from the center. So you have Selene offered a course on interpretive methods in 2014. On the left-hand side, Hans is now in Belo Horizonte. John has been at UFMG twice, in 2009 and in 2013. So these are just a few pictures of the group and of campus here. So who are our main partners? So we have a very important partner, which is the National Institute of Science and Technology in Digital Democracy, based in Salvador, and with a network of researchers working on digital democracy, working on technology, broadly speaking. The Center for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance is a very important partner, and we've developed the researches and co-authored books and papers with several scholars in the center, and also other Brazilian institutions such as the Federal University of Goiás, Federal Fluminense, the Federal University of Pará, IESP, and also here where I am, the Center for the Study of Democracy in the University of California, Irvine. So here are some of the books that Margem has published on digital democracy, on public deliberation, on territorialities, online deliberation, deliberative systems, Afro-Latin American in movement. So dialogues between Foucault and Rancière, ethics in communication, introduction to democratic theory. So just broadly speaking, on some of the covers of the books that I thought should be interesting, that have been written and developed within the group. But the group, just to be quicker now, the group works around some main research lines. So the first research line we work with is political theory, and discussing theories of democratic theories and theories of justice. And we're currently working on democratic erosion and on the comprehension of the crisis of democracy, looking specifically at the public sphere and its metamorphosis, its changes, and how it has acquired new shapes. And we are specifically concerned in looking at deliberative democracy, deliberative systems, and deliberative ecologies to understand conceptually how we can think about deliberative democracy. So we are working on those ideas, and we have been working with these concepts. And also on the concept of vulnerability, which is a central concept to think about justice and the way Margem works. The second research line focuses on participation policy and democratic innovations. And so we are working on the design and implementation of participatory experiments. And then there are the Global Citizens Assembly. So there's the partnership with the center to develop the Brazilian part of the Global Assembly in genome editing, and also some participation in the Global Assembly on climate change. We are also strongly connected to the state legislature of Minas Gerais, where we investigate the participatory innovations that they have developed since the 1990s, and help them to think critically about these innovations and how they can innovate their innovations. So there's a long project for almost 10 years now to analyze critically the democratic innovations at the state legislature of Minas Gerais, where we are based, and also attempts to theorize innovative innovations. So there's several members of the group, such as Cristiano, working on collective candidacies and collective mandates, but I'm also working on it. And the idea to investigate and to discuss other forms of innovation that have been happening in Brazil recently. And also several scholars in this research line looking at the interactions between policymakers, activists, and experts. So there are some people specifically working on those topics and investigating. Trying to be quick here so as to. The third research line we work with is on social movements, social conflict and struggles, broadly speaking. So we are interested in contemporary repertoires of contention, looking at contemporary protests, at ordinary forms of resistance that are not organized as social movements, but also looking at social movements. And then we have a history looking at environmental movements, feminist movements, Black movements, conservative movements, LGBTQI plus movements, and movements of migrants and urban movements. So the centrality of looking and studying struggles, conflicts, which is part of Margem and several researchers working at Margem. And then lastly, but which is in the focus of the topic today, we have a research line focusing on communication technology and politics. And then the main projects conducted here look at disinformation and conspiracy theories. So we have work on how disinformation networks happen and work in Brazil, and conspiracy theories. We have just concluded a research on vaccine exigency and looking at paying attention to the monitoring online discourses of anti-vax movements in several platforms. There are also people working with COVID, disinformation, and fake news, broadly speaking, in different dimensions. Also in the research line of communication technology and politics, we look at public discussions, we look at public deliberations, we look at discursive clashes that happen mainly online. And we have done that looking at LGBTQI movements, political reform, gender violence, abortion, environmental justice, food security, and agroecology. So this is some of the topics that we have covered in previous researches. And to conclude, some three contemporary projects or specific works. One on memes and politics. And so there's written a paper on the political dimension of good morning memes, and how everyday memes circulating in the public sphere are part of political discursive flows that are relevant to the public sphere and to understand some of the elements of Brazilian politics. And I want diplomacy memes that are at the core of the Ukrainian war. And there are so many memes and that help to understand the discursive frames built around the war. And so this is a topic. Another one is political images and visual analysis. And so there are people working with visual analysis of the pandemic and trying to understand the different pandemics and trying to understand the contemporary COVID-19 pandemic. Populism is a topic, and Renato here focuses on visual analysis of populism, and also vulnerable bodies. And Angela works specifically with the images of vulnerable bodies in different media and doing visual analysis mainly. And the last topic on technology and politics we're working on is a book on algorithms that is focused on trying to build two things: an institutional reading of algorithms, trying to think of algorithms as institutions in contemporary societies, and trying to think of the ways that individuals resist to the power of algorithms, to the power of these institutions, and try to democratize these institutions that are algorithms. So those are some of the projects and some of the connections and relations here. Sorry, I could not talk about the specific details because there's many people working on different topics, but I think that it would be very interesting if you could listen from quickly, and with 4 minutes per each, Mariana, Renato, and Leticia, who investigate specific topics on points that I have previously talked. So can we start with Mariana?
Hello, good evening. I'd like to say it's very nice to meet everyone, and I'm pleased to be here. Ricardo invited me to talk a little bit about what I'm doing for my master's research. So I prepared a brief overview for today's presentation. And my research centers on the musical discourse of Black diaspora, specifically in Brazil and the United States. And the problem I'm trying to answer is which are the epistemic devices used by Black musicians in this space to produce knowledge, and how we can look at music as a resource for knowledge production. My focus is specifically considering that beyond functioning as a vehicle for discourse, music has its own resources that are used to produce a kind of sonic and vernacular message. And that is to say that music is its own space for creating interpretations of the world. And thinking specifically about Black music post 1970s, there is an important influence of hip-hop culture and rap music, which, with all its contradictions and multiplicities, has always been articulated with pressing social issues in the context where it's made. So it's important to think how different communities within this broader definition of the Black diaspora appropriate musical discourse. And we can think of this both spatially with artists located in different countries or regions, or with regards to identities such as Black women and queer people making music. For my research, I chose to analyze the two latest albums released by Beyonce and Emicida. And Beyonce, who I think you might be more familiar with, is an American singer that has transited in different rhythms in her career, and therefore in different communities that range from pop to rap to R&B, etc. And recently, she has been making the gender and racial debates more and more clear in her music, her visual productions, and her shows. And Emicida, on the other hand, is a Brazilian rapper that was born and raised in the periphery of São Paulo. And he has always discussed the power structures of Brazil, including its structural, systemic, and cultural implications. But recently, he has been focusing on searching alternatives rooted in community and affect. I chose them because they are very differently positioned, but they participate in a common scene of connected communicative forces that constitute the diaspora. And I try to look at them not from the perspective of them as individuals and their biographies, but from the way they articulate with this broader culture. And this way, it's possible to identify how particularities regarding gender, regionality, musical influences produce not better or worse theorizations, but different ones. And to understand them, I use critical discourse analysis as a three-level methodology: a textual one, a discursive one, and one of social practices. And to look at music specifically, I concentrated in particular language patterns, such as African American vernacular English and Portuguese, and how code switching is strategically used to promote a dynamic between internal and external communication. I also focused on dialogue and how sampling resources and the participation of featured artists are used to import debates and promote dialogue with, in them, sometimes critically, sometimes as a homage, and maybe even both at the same time. And in this way, music has the power to bridge time and space and put different locations in close dialogue. And just to finish, I tried to approximate also post-colonial theories and intersectionality and use them as a background for the thesis. Intersectionality because facilitates thinking how different axes of power and resistance articulate themselves in multiple dominions of social life to shape personal and group experiences and solidarities. And post-colonial theory helps me understand the role of displacement and coloniality in organizing power and struggle. And these theories have some commonalities, such as the commitment to social justice and the rejection of binary and absolute readings. And they are both guided by some kind of allusion to the idea of the borders, the in-betweens, and where discourses and identities and movements can meet as coalitions, but also in a contingent way to reshape and reinvent themselves, addressing what they have in common and what are their contradictions. And to this space, where struggle and possibility coexist by being a part of society, but not quite, and where people can see what's within, but also some ways out, Bell Hooks gives the name of the margin. And to look at music as an intersectional and marginal practice, I wish to address its potentialities, contradictions, alliances, and reinventions. And I want to do this by focusing on music's own intellectuality and history. And that's what I presented today. Thank you very much. Back to Ricardo.
Our quick presentation. Now we move to Renato and conclude with Leticia.
Okay, hi everyone. It's very nice to see everybody, finally see the faces from the text we always read. That's also that is also always very nice. Well, hello, my name is Renato. I'm a PhD candidate in political science at UFMG. I've been a member of Margem for around 6 years, I think. And during both my graduation and my master's and now my PhD candidacy. And throughout this time, I have worked on different research projects. In my first year, I mainly worked with protests and framing analysis, doing a review on the literature about the 2013 protests in Brazil. Then I did some analysis on focus groups about these protests. And by the end of my graduation, I started studying right-wing youth groups in Belo Horizonte. And I did a short-term ethnographic study with them for the closing of the graduation. During my master's, I developed a research with Ricardo on populism and the visual analysis of Bolsonaro's self-presentation on Instagram, which resulted in an article published in the International Journal of Press Politics. And in this article, we proposed the concept of populism as parody, which the idea is basically that the current Brazilian president images on Instagram allow us to see a visual aesthetic that combines this typical populist sense of being of the people with the understanding of a charismatic exceptionality, but with a twist that his performance is always this combination emphasized by extremes and exaggeration and hyperbole. Through this parody, we think Bolsonaro emphasizes his ordinarities, but also deconstructs institutional rituals and create a new form of distance that allows him to perform his presidency as a parody. We built the argument by drawing a theoretical bridge between queer theory and the notion of grotesque and carnivalesque in Bakhitins. But currently, I'm also taking into account some discussions made by Baudrillard and Jameson on the notion of parody, and some discussions made by Eve Sedgwick on masculinity and camp. So overall, I'm exploring and testing the expansion of this idea of populism as parody for my PhD, raising the question if it's possible to see the parody among other populist leaders and populist performances. But I have not yet fully designated my empirical corpus, but will probably focus on images and visual analysis. So this is what I'm working on currently. Although, as Ricardo said, last year, we've worked on another project with Felipe and Camilo, where we studied vaccine hesitant communities on Instagram. And this is what I've been working on for the past few years. So my main interest is revolve around protest, images, ethnography, and populism. Thank you very much for listening to me.
And Leticia, to conclude.
Okay, thank you. Good evening for those in Brazil. I think it's good morning for those in Australia. It's a great opportunity to be here and share a bit of my research at Margem. So I thank you for that. So as I've said before, my name is Leticia and I'm a PhD candidate of political science. And I also have done my master's research at Margem. Somehow with both, I've been working around protests, social movements and struggles and urban struggles somehow in both of these researches. I focused on 2013 protests before, and now I'm moving on to try to understand the food delivery platform workers mobilizations in Brazil. So now I take that the literature is pointing to changes in the repertoire of contention, and we've been finding the coexistence between all the new elements of such repertoire. And I understand that the food delivery platform workers mobilization in Brazil, which is the focus of my research, but we can think of other places as well, is a part of such reconfiguration and is related with neoliberalism at its political, economic, and symbolical aspects. So I try to connect some changes and the relevance of neoliberalism for to think these changes on the repertoire of contention. So my research question is, how do food delivery platform workers in Brazil use such novelties of the contemporary repertoires of contentions? And to answer such question, I'll try to investigate 3 dimensions that I find to influence the way those workers mobilize and how they influence the changes on the repertoires of contention. And the dimensions are somehow a dialogue between the social movements theories, the urban theory, and neoliberalism. The first one would be the political economical dimension, in which I'm trying to understand how neoliberalism and both the precarization and platformization of work influence the ways the delivery platform workers mobilize. The second dimension is the urban one, and that's looking into the ways the production of space and the neoliberal cities shape the ways the delivery platforms work, and the everyday aspects of the workers living and producing in unequal cities. And the third dimension is the political organization one, in which I investigate the use of digital networks in the mobilization of precarious workers, both as their spaces of socialization and resistance, and of submission to the enterprises of the platform capitalism. So I understand that the platform delivery workers are exemplary in the labor transformations under neoliberalism and are part of the reconfigurations of the contemporary repertoire of contention. And I expect to find that delivery workers use such repertoire changes in a multiplicity of ways, as they are not very coherent over time and have little coordination in their actions, tendency to spontaneity, frail collective identity, and oscillation between the left and right wings. There have been food delivery platform workers mobilizations in different sorts of cities in Brazil, big ones, small ones, capitals or not, since 2020, and with different kinds of political identity and structure. So there is a challenge regarding the case study methodology, which I'm trying to look into now. But I aim to make an overview of the mobilizations and also focus on a couple of cities and organizations as new protests are arising this year. So we are seeing new protests under the context of increases in gas prices and the federal elections that will take place on October. So I think that's that for now, and I'll be happy to share some more of our comments. Thank you.
Well, so this is us, a little bit of us. And sorry if we had to present quickly, but I just thought it was important also to hear other voices besides mine. I think this is great that Mariana, Leticia, and Renato could represent some of the other scholars doing research. So thank you for your time and attention, and we are open for questions.